Hello and welcome back to La Crime Noire. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you're drawn to dark, haunting stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now settle in, clear your mind, let the outside world slip away, and let's begin. Story 1. This is just a personal diary entry, something that happened when I went back to my hometown area for the holidays. I still don't know what to call it. I don't even know if hometown is the right word anymore, because I don't really have one. I think it was 2024, right at the end of Ramadan in Malaysia. If you've never been here during that time, the country changes in a way that's hard to explain. Everyone starts moving at once. People who work or study in the city suddenly become travelers. Families pack cars, buses fill up, and every highway turns into a long, slow line of headlights. Everyone is trying to get back to their kampung, their hometown, to celebrate Hari Raya with parents, grandparents, cousins, everyone. It's supposed to be warm and happy. The mood is festive, even when the traffic is brutal. For me, it's always been a little different. Both my grandparents passed away years ago, and after that, the place that used to feel like home stopped feeling like it belonged to anyone. Over time, it became more like a memory than a destination. So my family and I usually celebrate in the city with extended relatives instead. That's normal for us now. Still, something about Raya season always makes you feel like you're supposed to go somewhere, even if you don't have a somewhere left. That year, my university was also shifting schedules because of the holiday rush. I had just finished my last physical class before everything switched to online classes. The university did it because so many students leave early to beat the jam, and also because Raya Prep is hectic for most people. Once you go home, you're not just resting. You're helping cook, clean, shop, visit family, attend prayers, everything. The days get packed fast. I decided I would go back 2 days before Raya. Not because I had a lot waiting for me, but because I felt like I should. Like I needed to see the place one more time. Or maybe I just needed to get away from the city noise for a few days. I booked a night bus because I thought it would be easier. Less traffic, cooler air, and I could sleep through most of the ride. The trip from my uni area to my hometown region usually takes around 6 to 7 hours, depending on traffic. On the way, the bus normally stops at a few rest stops. We call them RNR, short for rest and relax. They're the kind of places where you use the bathroom, buy snacks, maybe pray, stretch your legs, then get back on the road. That night, the bus was supposed to arrive at 8 p.m. It didn't. At first, it was the normal kind of delay, people complaining, checking their phones, walking around the station. The staff said something vague, like the bus was on the way. Then 9 o'clock became 10 o'clock. The station slowly emptied out, and the air started to feel stale, like it always does after midnight in places meant for daytime crowds. By the time the bus finally showed up, it was around 11:30 p.m. The whole energy at the platform had changed. Everyone looked tired and irritated, but also resigned. Like, fine, just get us there. I remember thinking that the delay might actually help, because leaving that late would mean the roads were quieter. But the bus still didn't depart right away. People boarded, stowed their bags, found their seats. The bus attendant did his routine checks. The driver spoke briefly with station staff. Nothing dramatic, just slow and messy, like they were behind schedule and couldn't catch up. The bus finally pulled out at around 12:40 a.m. It was a modern, long-distance bus, the kind with decent seats and air conditioning that can get way too cold once you're an hour in. There were a lot of passengers, but not completely full. A mix of students going home for Raya, foreign workers traveling between cities, and a few quiet older people who looked like they'd done this route 1,000 times. There were also empty seats scattered around, which I was grateful for. Sometimes on these buses you end up cramped next to someone who wants to talk the entire night, and I wasn't in the mood. I put my bag close to my feet, leaned back, and tried to relax. The bus lights were dim. The curtains were drawn halfway. The road noise and the engine hum had that steady rhythm that usually knocks me out. For the first hour, everything felt normal. The bus took the main highway at first, the newer one, the route with more traffic, but also more streetlights. Usually it's bright enough that you can see the shape of trees and buildings, even at night. Cars pass by, trucks rumble, and the world outside feels busy even if you're half asleep. Then, about an hour in, I noticed something. The bus turned off. At first I thought it was just a detour, but the road changed fast. The lights became fewer, then almost none. The highway's smoothness disappeared, replaced by older asphalt. The bus started swaying slightly more. The outside view became mostly dark shapes, tall trees and occasional reflectors that flashed in the headlights like eyes. We were taking the back roads. In Malaysia, that can mean the old road routes along forest edges. Sometimes drivers use them to avoid traffic jams. It can save time if the main highway is clogged with holiday travelers. But buses rarely take those roads because they're narrower, darker, and in some stretches, you're surrounded by forest with very little in between. I sat up a little, trying to confirm what I was seeing. My phone GPS was weak, but the general direction felt right. Still, something about the turn bothered me. I remember thinking, maybe the driver knows a shortcut. Maybe he's trying to make up for the delay. I told myself that was it. Practical reasons. Nothing else. We passed one R&R not too long after the turn. The stop was quick, and I didn't get off. I was trying to sleep, and my body was already tired from the long day. But after another stretch of driving, the bus slowed again. The attendant announced the next stop. People stirred, some stretching in their seats, some grabbing bags. When we pulled in, I looked out the window and immediately felt uneasy. This R&R was on the edge of the forest. That's not unusual here. Many rest stops are built near or even inside forest areas. But this one looked abandoned in a way that didn't match the fact that buses still stopped there. The building was an older style, like a pondock. It had those old jalousie windows, the slatted kind, and an open-air roof section that made it look more like a shelter than a proper facility. The lights were dim and yellow, and the surrounding area felt swallowed by trees. There were a few vending machines nearby, but even they looked outdated, their panels scratched and dull. This place wasn't built for comfort. It was built for function. Bathroom, prayer, quick stop, then leave. I told myself to stay on the bus. I really did. But then my body reminded me I'd been holding it too long. The kind of situation where you can either get off now or regret it later. So I got off. Almost immediately, I noticed I was the only male passenger stepping down at that stop. A few women got off too, but they walked in groups, heading toward the women's side or the small prayer area. The men stayed inside. Maybe they had already used the bathroom at the previous stop. Maybe they just didn't want to get off at a place like this. I understood them the second my shoes hit the ground. The air felt heavier here, thick with forest dampness. It wasn't cold, but it felt wrong against my skin, like standing too close to a cave entrance. The parking area was quiet except for distant insects and the soft hiss of the bus engine cooling down. The dark tree line wasn't far. It felt like if you walked too far from the lights, you'd disappear into it. The men's bathroom building was open, no proper door, just an entryway. Inside, the tiles looked old and slightly stained. The lighting was uneven, casting shadows where shadows shouldn't be. The stalls were lined up in a row, and because it was so quiet, every little sound traveled and echoed. I remember thinking, this is a perfect horror movie setup. Lonely bathroom, dim lights, forest outside, stalls that go all the way back. Even though I tried to act normal, my body was tense. I told myself one thing to calm down. It's Ramadan. In our culture and religion, we're taught that during Ramadan, demons and evil spirits are chained or locked away. The idea is that the month is protected, spiritually. That thought is comforting for a lot of people. It's like saying, even if the world feels dark, it's not allowed to be that dark right now. So I held on to that and walked into a stall. I did my business fast. I didn't scroll my phone. I didn't waste time. I just wanted to get out and back into the bus, back into the normal world with people, and light. While I was inside the stall, I heard someone enter the stall next to mine. It sounded normal. Footsteps, a shift, the slight creak of the stall door. I didn't think much of it. I just assumed another guy had decided to get off after all, or maybe a worker was inside cleaning. I finished, washed my hands, and stepped out. The stall beside mine was empty. Not empty because someone left quickly. Empty in a way that didn't make sense. The door wasn't even closed. It was open, like nobody had used it at all. I stood there staring, my brain trying to rewind the last 30 seconds. I had definitely heard the stall door. I had definitely heard movement. I even remember thinking, okay, at least I'm not the only one in here. For a moment, I felt embarrassed, like maybe I'd imagined it. Like maybe I was so on edge that my brain created sounds. Then the last stall at the end of the row slammed shut. The sound was so loud it punched through the whole bathroom. It echoed off the tiles and made my heart jump like someone had shoved me. The slam didn't sound like a gentle swing of a door. It sounded like force. That was it for me. No more logic, no more comfort thoughts about Ramadan, no more telling myself I was being dramatic. I got out. I didn't walk calmly. I didn't check anything. I just moved fast, half running, back toward the bus like the space behind me was reaching. When I climbed back onto the bus, the cold air conditioning hit me, and for the first time that night, it felt good. It felt like returning to a normal place, like the bus was a safe box on wheels. People started boarding again. The attendant stood near the front, doing what he always did, checking seats, counting heads. I tried to settle in, but my skin still felt tight, like I was waiting for another sound. Then I noticed something that made my blood go cold. When the attendant reached my row, he counted the seat beside me. There was no one there. I was sitting alone. The row next to me was empty. In fact, the 2 seats beside me were empty. I had chosen this spot partly because there was space, but the attendant pointed and counted like someone was there. I stared at him, hoping I misunderstood, hoping he was counting seat numbers, not people. But his lips moved the way you count passengers. 1, 2, 3, moving down the aisle. When he came back again to double-check, he did it again. He included the empty seat beside me like it had a person in it. My chest tightened. I tried to count passengers myself, using only what I could see without looking obvious. From my angle, I counted 22. The attendant's count ended at 24, 2 extra. And the 2 seats beside me were still empty. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. I kept my eyes open, pretending to rest, listening to the bus sounds and watching the aisle through half-lowered eyelids. I didn't want to look too alert, because I didn't want attention. But inside I was panicking. 2 hours passed like that. The bus rolled through darkness, the forest outside turning into a constant black wall. No street lights, just the headlights cutting a narrow path forward. Sometimes the bus would pass a sign or a reflector post, and it would flash bright for a second, then disappear. Then the attendant approached me again. He leaned down slightly and spoke quietly, polite and normal, like he was asking something simple. He spoke in Malay, but I'll translate as best as I can. "Sir, can you change seats for a moment?" he asked. My throat felt dry. Switch where, Bang?" I said. Bang is short for a bang, a respectful way to call an older man, like bro or sir, depending on context. He pointed at the seat right beside me. "Just this seat. Earlier, the Mac chick asked to switch seats. She wants to look outside." My heart stopped. He was pointing at the empty seat. And he said Mac chick, which means an older auntie, an older woman. The thing is, I hadn't seen any older women on the bus. It was mostly students and foreign workers. No aunties, no grandmas. No one who would ask to switch seats just to look outside in the middle of the night on a dark forest road. I looked at him. Then I said the only thing I could think of, the truth. And the moment I said it, I saw the color drain from his face. Bang. The Mac chick. "Wasn't she sitting across from me?" I asked, pointing vaguely toward the seat opposite my row. His eyebrows lifted. He looked confused, then irritated, like he thought I was messing with him. Yes, sir. You didn't notice? There's a Mac chick with her child." My stomach dropped. "No," I said, quieter now. "From uni until now, nobody has been sitting there. I'm the only one in this row. Those seats were always empty." The attendant froze. He didn't argue. He didn't laugh. He didn't brush it off. He stared at the empty seat beside me like his brain was trying to force it to make sense. Then he straightened up quickly like he suddenly remembered how to move. He went back down the aisle and began counting again, but this time his voice was lower, almost shaky. I heard him reach 22. He stopped. He looked up, eyes scanning the rows like he expected to see someone who wasn't there anymore. His hands tightened around the seatbacks as he moved forward. Then he came back to me, face pale, and in a strained voice he said, "Sorry," over and over, like apologizing could fix something he couldn't explain. Then he turned and rushed toward the front of the bus. I stayed still for a moment, not because I was calm, but because I felt like if I moved too fast, I would draw attention. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck. My hands were sweaty. Then I did the one thing I knew I needed to do. I moved. I grabbed my bag and quietly relocated to an empty seat in front of me, closer to other passengers. I didn't want that row anymore. I didn't want to sit beside empty seats that weren't empty to someone else. The rest of the ride changed after that. The atmosphere turned tense in a way that didn't feel like ordinary discomfort. It felt like the bus itself became unwelcoming, like the air grew heavier and the silence became sharp. And what scared me most was that it wasn't just me feeling it. Not long after my conversation with the attendant, people started waking up. Not in a normal way, like someone shifting because of a bump in the road, but suddenly, all at once. One person sat up, then another. Heads turned. People looked around. You could feel it spreading, that uneasy alertness you can't fake. Nobody wanted to sleep anymore. Outside, the forest kept sliding past. Inside, the bus lights stayed dim. The driver didn't stop again at any R&R. He didn't announce anything. He just kept going, straight toward the city, like stopping wasn't an option anymore. Then the sound started. Light tapping on the windows, not constant, just here and there. Sometimes one tap, sometimes a few in a row, like a fingernail against glass, or a small stone, or something following and testing the surface. Once or twice, I heard something else, faint and distant, like a high-pitched laugh far off in the trees. In Malay, we call it menjilai, a kind of sharp, eerie laughter that people associate with certain spirits. I didn't want to believe it. I tried to tell myself it was just wind, or birds, or my brain turning fear into sound. But the bus was moving fast. Wind noise was steady, not like laughter. And nobody laughed on that bus. Nobody was joking. Nobody was even talking much. When we finally reached the city station, the relief should have been immediate. Bright lights, concrete, people, safety. But the moment the bus stopped and the doors opened, we all saw the outside of the bus. There were scratch marks along the side. Long streaks like something had scraped the metal while we were moving. The windows were fogged up, all of them, even though it was hot outside, around 32 degrees Celsius. Fogging like that didn't make sense. The air conditioning inside was cold, yes, but not enough to fog every window like we were sealed in a freezer. People stood in the aisle, staring out, whispering, not wanting to be the first to step off. I waited until others began moving. My legs felt stiff. My mouth tasted sour. As I passed the row where I had originally been sitting, I glanced over without meaning to. And that's when I saw her. A Maychick was sitting there. She wasn't blurred. She wasn't a shadow. She was solid. She wore the kind of clothes older women wear when traveling, neat and simple. She was smiling, wide and calm, like she was proud of something. Her eyes looked hollow, not dark like normal eyes, but empty in a way that made my stomach flip. On her lap was something that didn't belong on a bus seat. A tombstone. Not a small object, not a picture. A tombstone, resting like a bag, like it was light enough for her to carry. She lifted one hand and waved at us slowly as people filed past. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My whole body locked up, and for a second I thought I would collapse right there in the aisle. Then I heard it. A faint crying sound. Not loud, not dramatic. A small child's cry. thin and tired, coming from inside the bus from somewhere behind that row. I didn't turn back to look for the child. I didn't want to see anything else. I got off the bus and walked out into the bright station lights like I was escaping a place that had rules I didn't understand. Around me, other passengers looked shaken, faces tight, eyes wide, voices low. Nobody wanted to talk about what we'd seen, but everyone moved fast, like staying near the bus for even another minute was dangerous. After that night, I never took the night bus again. Not during Ramadan, not after it, not ever. Some things you can explain away. A weird sound in the bathroom, a bad rest stop, a tired brain, even a strange head count mistake. But I know what I saw at the end, and I know what I heard. Story 2. This isn't really my favorite story to tell, but it's the easiest one I can remember clearly, from start to finish. Maybe because it happened so early in my life that it never had a chance to get mixed up with other memories. Or maybe because it set the tone for everything that came after it. So it stayed pinned in my mind like something sharp. For context, I was born sick. Not got sick as a baby. Sick. I mean sick from the first day. Sick from the moment I started breathing. Like my body came into the world already tired of being here. Sometimes I've wondered if that can happen. If a baby can sense they weren't wanted. And if that feeling can sink into their bones before they even understand what love is supposed to be. I've been ill for as long as anyone can remember. I am ill now, and I'll probably die ill. I'm not saying it for sympathy. It's just how things are built in me, like a flaw in the design that nobody can patch. My father drank. My mother didn't care the way mothers are supposed to care. Between those two things and whatever bad luck I was born with, I ended up with a long list of medical problems before I was even old enough to form full sentences. Chronic stuff. Infections that shouldn't happen that early. Allergies. A weak immune system that couldn't do its job. MRSA. Hay fever. Things that sound normal when you say them quickly, but are not normal when you're 2 years old and your body can't fight back properly. Other kids were chewing on cables and sticking toys in their mouths. I was dealing with doctors and medicine and people talking over my head like I was a problem they needed to manage. I was supposed to be learning how to run without falling. Instead, I remember tubes and masks and that plastic hospital smell that clings to everything. My first memory is tied to E. coli. I can't say exactly how it happened. I've heard different versions, and people always try to soften it when they talk about it. The one explanation I got over and over was that it was unforeseen circumstances. But I also heard the less polite version. My mother wanted her toddler to eat a cheap hamburger, the kind that costs $1 and sits under heat lamps too long. The kind of thing most parents wouldn't feed to a kid whose body already struggled with normal food. Whatever the cause, I got infected badly. I was too young to understand what was happening, but I remember the pain in a simple way, like my entire middle was twisting. Someone later tried to explain it to me in kid language and said it was like there was a tornado inside me, destroying everything it touched. That description stuck because it felt accurate. It wasn't just a stomachache. It was violence inside my body. I remember being taken for tests. Bright lights, cold hands, the steady, careful tone of nurses who don't want to scare a child but also don't want to waste time. At some point, I felt sleepy, deeply sleepy, like I was floating on a cloud. The kind of exhaustion where you stop fighting because it's easier to let the world go fuzzy. When I finally came home, I fell asleep right away in my bed. Even though I slept in my mother's bedroom, my small bed next to hers, I didn't reach for her at night. I didn't cry for comfort. That probably sounds sad, but it was normal for me. I learned early that wanting things from my mother didn't lead anywhere good. If I cried, she got angry. If I asked, she complained. If I needed her, she treated it like an inconvenience. So I slept the way I always slept. I lay on my side, face turned toward the wall under the window. The wooden frame lined up just above my temple. The wall was cold, and the cold soothed me. When you're feverish and weak, cool surfaces feel like relief. The window faced the street, and sometimes my mother would open it. If she did, I could feel night air coming in, and I could hear footsteps outside. Neighbors walking, someone heading to the corner store, a car door closing, the ordinary sounds of life that made me feel less trapped inside my body. Sometimes, if I was unlucky, I'd hear my mother leaving without me. The sound of her shoes, her keys, the door opening and closing. Even as a child, I could tell the difference between someone walking by and someone leaving the house. That night, I heard footsteps close to the window. I remember the sound clearly because it was so near. The crunch of gravel, the soft drag of shoes, the pause right below the window like someone had stopped to stand there. Then I heard my name. I'm not going to write the name for privacy reasons, but it wasn't the kind of name strangers would know. It was a family nickname, a diminutive, something used by relatives, not by people on the street. And it wasn't my mother's name. It wasn't my grandmother's. It was mine. They said it softly, gently, like they were trying not to scare me, like they were calling a pet, like they knew exactly where I was lying in the dark. I opened my eyes. At first I thought my mother was standing there, but the light in the room didn't change. My mother didn't move. She was still in her bed. The voice wasn't inside the room. It was outside, right beyond the glass. When I turned my head slightly toward the window, I saw someone standing there. Their shape didn't make sense at first. It was too bright against the dark street, like they were lit from within. There was a lamppost behind them, but the glow around their hair looked wrong, almost white gold, like strands of light. Their hair was long, wispy, and pale. I couldn't tell if they were a boy or a girl. Their face was smooth and calm, and their eyes were the color of honey, shining like something wet reflecting a candle flame. They placed a hand on the window pane. Their hands were very pale, almost beautiful in the way marble can be beautiful. They looked down at me like they had been searching and finally found what they wanted. "Come with me," they said. Their voice was soft, not threatening, not loud. It sounded kind, the way someone talks when they're trying to convince a child to trust them. The words should have frightened me. I was taught, even at that age, not to talk to strangers. But my body was weak, and I was half asleep, and their voice felt strangely comforting. They began to pry at the window, pushing it up slowly as if it wasn't locked properly. I remember feeling dizzy, like my head was full of cotton. My thoughts were slow. My stomach still hurt from being sick. A part of me wanted to obey just because it felt easier than resisting anything. But another part of me, small, stubborn, clearer than it had any right to be, felt that something was wrong. Even if everything about them looked gentle, there was something that didn't fit. They were too close, too confident, too familiar with my name, too sure I would come. "I can't," I said, and shook my head. It was the only way I knew how to say no at that age. The same way I shook my head when my mother tried to feed me eggs or meat I didn't want. I thought maybe it would work here too. "But you have to," they said. "It's time." They smiled as they spoke, and the smile should have made me feel safe, but it didn't. It felt like a decision had been made somewhere, and my opinion wasn't part of it. Their hands slipped farther into the opening window, reaching toward me, not rushed at all. Patient, certain. That's when my fear hit fully. I screamed. It came out hoarse and rough, like my throat didn't know how to make that sound properly yet. I screamed anyway, loud enough that it hurt, loud enough that my chest stung. The next part is blurry, like a scene cut too fast. My mother was awake and yelling, not worried, not asking what happened, not checking the window, just screaming at me for screaming, like I'd insulted her by needing attention. "I can't remember everything," she said. "I only remember the heat of her anger filling the room and the strange emptiness of it. Because I had just seen something at the window and she acted like the problem was me. And then it was over. No one called the police. No one checked outside. In my family, things like that didn't become real problems unless they caused trouble for the adults. My mother later told people it was a night terror, and she called it pleasant, like it was some cute story about a dramatic toddler. Pleasant wasn't the word for it. Years passed. I grew older. I learned more. I learned what E. coli actually was, and that the tornado explanation was just a way to make a kid stop asking questions. I learned that I wasn't supposed to speak to strangers, and that whatever happened at that window was not something normal people experienced. I also learned that if you bring up strange things in certain families, you get mocked, dismissed, or punished for it, so you learn to stay quiet. I became the older sister type, the responsible one, the one who helps because nobody else is going to. My family wanted me to be a good Catholic girl, which mostly meant behaving, staying small, staying useful. When my siblings were born, my parents' interest in me faded even more. I wasn't the baby anymore. I was the helper. I stayed single for a long time. Permanently single, really? People assumed that meant I was sad or picky or broken. The truth was simpler. Relationships never felt good to me. They never felt safe. I went on dates. I tried. But everything fell flat, like I was watching myself pretend to be normal while my body waited for something to go wrong. Even when I tried to take care of it myself, surviving the flu, getting through shingles, dealing with my constant congestion and infections, there was never a real break. No moment where I felt fully okay. It was like my life was always built around endurance. Then I got my first boyfriend. If you want my honest opinion, he was a jerk. Not the charming kind, the exhausting kind. The kind of guy who wants a girlfriend like other people want an accessory. Someone to point at and say, "See, I'm normal, I'm desirable, I'm not a loser." His name was Sebastian. He worked well as a decoy, which makes me sound cruel, but that's how it started. A boyfriend-shaped thing I could show people so they'd stop asking questions. He looked like the type of guy some girls liked. vaguely interesting looking, but still safe enough that nobody questioned why he was with me. Small, beady eyes, pale skin, always whining about something. I wasn't attracted to him. He knew it. I think he liked that, in a twisted way, because it meant he could control the relationship through guilt and pressure. My friends didn't really know him, and that was intentional. Sebastian existed mostly as a story I told, a label I wore in public. It kept people from digging into my life too much. It worked until it didn't. Sebastian started drinking more and more. At first it was normal college drinking nonsense. Then it became constant. Then it became ugly. Eventually he was out drinking my father, which is saying something. Watching him was like watching a person slowly choose to rot, and it made my skin crawl. I decided I had to end it. Not because it was heartbreaking, but because it was embarrassing and dangerous, and there was nothing to salvage. The problem was, I had built him into my social image. If I broke up with him, I would have to explain why nobody ever met him. I would have to admit it wasn't real in the way people assumed it was. One day at lunch, one of my friends asked the question I'd been dreading. "When are you going to introduce him to us?" she said, smiling like it was harmless. My stomach nodded. "Soon," I lied, nodding like confidence could make it true. "Soon, I hope." She didn't drop it. "What does he look like?" I wanted to say. "He looks like trouble. He looks like a bottle. He looks like the kind of future I don't want." Instead, I panicked and described a man who didn't exist. "He's blonde," I said quickly, "and tall, and handsome. Really handsome." It sounded fake even to me, like I'd pulled it from an ad. Nobody fully believed me, and I could feel that shift in the air when people realize your story has holes in it. Then life got worse in a different direction. My grandmother got seriously ill around that time, right before my third semester of college started. People joke about my grandma died as an excuse to get out of work, and I used to hate that joke. Then it happened for real, right when I needed stability the most. It wasn't a clean, quick illness. It was the kind that drags, where everyone watches someone fade and pretends they don't see it because admitting it feels like inviting death in faster. The night before one of my first days back, I had a nightmare. In the dream, I was at school, but I couldn't find my way. The hallways were dark, wrong, stretched out too long like a maze. There was a smell like formaldehyde and antiseptic, cold and sharp like a hospital lab. My legs ached as I walked, and I felt chilled all the way down to my bones. Then I saw someone ahead of me, a figure that looked like a way out. Something bright yellow gold cutting through the blue darkness of the dream. I ran toward it, desperate. The figure turned, opened its arms, and I ran straight into them. It caught me. And at the exact moment it caught me, I woke up. I lay in bed with my heart racing, the scent of death still clinging to my thoughts like smoke. I told myself it was just grief, just my brain mixing funeral images with school stress, making nonsense out of pain. The next day felt like a whole new kind of problem. I remember my thought process clearly, which is almost funny now. I didn't bring my backpack that morning because I told myself I only had one class and we were doing a debate, so I didn't need notes. I also knew I had a history of fainting spells, so I decided I would eat breakfast, like I was being responsible. My responsible breakfast was 3 burritos and a bottle of Coke. I know. Half a liter of Coke and 3 burritos later, I felt amazing. Full, energized, almost proud of myself. It's embarrassing how easy it is to feel fine when you're used to feeling awful. I walked out the door thinking, I did it. I'm functioning like a normal person today. I didn't even remember where I left my phone. I just went to class and sat down like everything was under control. About 20 minutes in, my stomach started doing that flipping thing. Not normal digestion. More like my insides were angry at me. A deep ache spread through my middle, and sweat prickled under my arms. I tried to breathe through it, telling myself it would pass. It didn't. The room tilted. The voices around me stretched out like they were coming from far away. I remember thinking, seriously? Over a stomachache? This is how ridiculous my body is? Then I fainted. The next thing I clearly remember is being moved through hallways on a chair or a gurney, the ceiling lights sliding overhead in a slow line. Someone was talking to me, asking questions, but I couldn't form proper answers. My mouth felt thick. I gagged a few times over nothing, the way you do when your body is confused and overloaded. They took me to the nurse's office. I sat there drinking electrolyte water, while the nurses fussed over me like I was fragile glass. Part of me was grateful. Part of me was humiliated. I kept thinking about my phone, about my bag, about how unprepared I looked. They asked if they should call someone to pick me up. I didn't have anyone reliable. My emergency contact was basically myself. My mother wasn't the kind of person who rushed to help. Even if they called her, she'd complain first. I wanted to tell them not to call anyone, that I'd be fine, that I could handle it. But I wasn't lucid enough to argue. I pressed my face against the cold wall, the way I always did when I needed grounding. Cold walls had been my comfort since childhood. That's when I heard a knock at the door. The head nurse's voice lifted with relief. Oh, he did come. I thought he wouldn't answer. She stepped out to open the door, and I turned my head slowly, already confused. Who did come? Who wouldn't answer? The door opened and sunlight poured in from behind the person standing there, turning them into a dark outline for a moment. Then they stepped inside. They were tall. They had long blonde hair, light and wispy. Their presence filled the doorway like they didn't quite belong in a small office. In one hand, they held my cell phone. In the other, my backpack. My stomach went cold. As my eyes adjusted, I saw their face more clearly, and it was like something old inside me woke up. Beautiful honey-colored eyes, bright in the sterile light of the infirmary. A calm expression that didn't match the situation. A familiarity I couldn't explain. The nurse smiled at me like she was delivering good news. Your boyfriend's here, she chirped. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, because I knew with a certainty that made my hands go numb that this wasn't Sebastian. This wasn't any boyfriend I'd ever had. This was the stranger from the window, grown into a shape that could walk through doors and carry my belongings like it had every right to them. They looked at me intently, like they were checking something, like they were confirming that I was still me. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard the words from that first night, soft and confident, like a promise that had simply been delayed. It's time. I sat there staring up at them, unable to say a single thing, because I suddenly understood why nothing in my life ever felt safe. Whatever had found me back then hadn't forgotten. It had just been waiting. Story 3. I was 13 when I went to the funeral of the sweet old lady who lived across the street from us. Her real name was Rosebud, but everyone called her Miss Rosebud, the way people do in small towns when someone has been around forever and feels like a permanent part of the place. She used to be the town librarian. She never married and never had kids, but somehow she still felt like family to everyone. She was the kind of person who remembered your name even when you were little and awkward and didn't think you mattered. She remembered what you liked to read. She remembered what you were afraid of. She remembered things you didn't even realize you'd said out loud. When I was younger, the library was one of the safest places I knew. Our town didn't have many places that felt safe in that calm, quiet way. The library did. It smelled like paper and old glue and floor polish. The air was always cool, even in summer. The lights were soft. If you whispered, you could hear your own voice bounce back from the shelves. Miss Rosebud ran it like it was a church, but not an angry church, a gentle one. If you were loud, she didn't snap at you. She would just look at you with this patient smile, like she was sure you could do better. And somehow you always did. I had never seen her without that smile. Not once. Even when someone was rude, even when kids knocked over book stacks, even when the town council cut funding and made her do twice the work with half the help, she stayed the same. Small and neat, dainty. Always wearing clean, simple clothes, hair pinned back, hands that moved carefully, like every motion was chosen on purpose. Sometimes when she walked down our street, you could hear her voice before you saw her. She would call out greetings to people in a way that made it feel like she meant it. Good morning. Beautiful day. How's your mother doing? She didn't just talk. She connected. And when you were a kid, hearing that kind of warmth from an adult can make you feel like the world isn't as cold as it sometimes is. That's why what happened a year before her funeral stuck with me so hard. It was the first time I ever felt afraid of her. It was late afternoon, not quite evening yet. The sun was low and made long shadows across the pavement. I was outside doing nothing important, just 13-year-old stuff, kicking a rock, watching cars pass, waiting for dinner. I saw Miss Rosebud coming down the street like I had seen her 100 times. Only this time she wasn't smiling. Her face looked tight and hard. She was scowling like someone had insulted her, like she was holding back anger or fear or both. Her shoulders were raised tense. She kept looking over her shoulder, then ahead, then to the side like she expected something to rush at her from any direction. Her eyes weren't soft anymore. They were wide and sharp, full of suspicion. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. I remember the exact moment the chill went through me. It wasn't just, this is weird. It was physical, like my body knew before my mind caught up. The hair on my arms rose. My stomach tightened. I still tried to be polite. That's how I was raised, and also, she was Miss Rosebud. "Hi, Miss Rosebud," I called, forcing my voice to sound normal. She jumped like I'd shouted in her ear. Her whole body jerked. For a second, she looked like she might run. Then she did something that made me freeze in place. She stepped right up to me, too close for comfort, and grabbed my head with both hands. Not gently. Not roughly either. Just urgently. Like she needed to hold me still. She turned my face toward hers and stared straight into my eyes. Her hands were cold. Her eyes searched mine like she was reading a page in a book, like she was hunting for a specific word. Her lips trembled. Whatever she thought she saw in me made her start crying right there on the sidewalk. Tears spilled out fast, messy and shocking on her usually perfect face. "Are we alone?" she whispered. Her voice wasn't melodic anymore. It sounded thin and scared. "Is it just you and me left?" I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what the question meant. Alone from what? Left from where? Before I could ask anything, footsteps sounded from around the corner. Someone was coming down the cross street toward us. Just ordinary steps, someone walking home. But the second Miss Rosebud heard them, she flinched like she'd been burned. She let go of me so quickly it felt like she had dropped something hot. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, looked at me one last time with this terrified, pleading expression, and then she hurried away, almost running, disappearing toward her house. That was the last time I saw her face to face until the funeral. After that day, the town's story about her changed. People started saying she was losing her mind, that her age had caught up to her, that she was having episodes, that she was confused, that she had dementia. People said it casually, the way people say things when they don't want to feel responsible for them. But I heard things at night. Her house was across the street, so close that if I looked out my bedroom window, I could see her front porch and her door and the small strip of yard in front. At first, it was small things. Lights turning on and off at odd hours, curtains twitching. The sense that she was always watching, always listening. Then it got worse. She started screaming whenever anyone went near her door. Horrible screams, not the kind you let out when you're annoyed. These were shrieks, raw and desperate, like she believed something terrible was happening. Neighbors would approach with casseroles or groceries trying to help, and she would scream at them to leave, to go away, to stop following her. Sometimes she yelled words that didn't make sense, like she was talking to someone nobody else could see. I remember lying in bed as a kid, staring at the ceiling while her screams floated through the night air. My parents would mutter about it downstairs, annoyed and uncomfortable, but they never called anyone. Not the police, not a doctor, not social services. In our town, people didn't like outside attention. They would rather let something rot quietly than admit it needed help. Late at night, sometimes I'd see her through my window. Her front door would open just a crack. Not enough for a body, just enough for a sliver of face. And she would peek out so slowly and carefully that it looked unreal. I could usually see only her eyes and the bridge of her nose. Her eyes would sweep the street from one end to the other, then back again, like she was counting something, checking for something. She would stay like that for minutes, barely moving. The street would be empty, quiet, normal. No cars, no people. Just dark pavement and the occasional flicker from a porch light. But she looked like she was watching an enemy line. Then after a while, she would open the door and come out. She moved like an old woman, stooped and slow, but she also moved like someone trying not to be seen. She would shuffle into the darkness with all her belongings strapped to her back in thick layers, bags and bundles and old blankets tied together. It was so much that from far away she didn't even look human. She looked like some hunched shape, like a mushroom walking upright. She would go up the street or down the street and vanish out of sight. Then, several minutes later, she would come back hobbling, and almost every time, she would fall. Not a gentle fall either. A hard, collapsing spill. Her bundles would burst open like she'd been carrying her life in loose pieces. Old photos would scatter on the road. Pieces of furniture, clothing, random household things that made no sense to bring on a walk in the dark. She would cry and plead while she tried to gather it all back up. Sometimes a neighbor would come outside, drawn by the noise, and call out to her, asking if she needed help. The second she saw anyone, she would panic and run as much as an old woman could run, leaving the road covered in broken pieces of her life. She would rush back inside her house and slam the door. After that, the screaming would start again. She screamed until dawn sometimes, begging someone, something, to let her leave. That all she wanted was to go. That she didn't want to stay here. That she wasn't supposed to stay here. Her voice would break and crack until it sounded like it wasn't even her anymore. That year, our family didn't go anywhere. We didn't take our usual vacation. We didn't visit my grandparents. We didn't go on little weekend trips. I didn't go on the school trip that everyone else went on. Every time something came up, there was an excuse. Money, work, timing, weather, car trouble, something. At 13, I didn't understand what was happening. I just felt this heavy frustration, like my life was shrinking. I thought my parents were being strict or cheap or difficult. I didn't realize, not fully, that I couldn't leave either. Not in the way a kid usually thinks about leaving, like running away for a day. I mean, I couldn't leave town. Something always stopped it, like an invisible hand turning us back again and again, without anyone admitting it was happening. Then one morning, my parents woke me up early, right at dawn. The room was still gray with early light. They were standing over me with faces that looked heavy and strange, like they'd aged overnight. My mother's eyes were wet. My father looked like he didn't know what to do with his hands. "Miss Rosebud is dead," my father said. They let the words sit there, like they had weight. My mother swallowed hard. "The funeral is in a few hours, Virgil. You need to get dressed." 2 hours later, I walked into the town parish in an ill-fitting suit. That was too small for me. The sleeves ended too high on my wrists. The collar pinched. I looked like a kid playing dress-up in someone else's life. The whole town was there. Every person who had ever borrowed a book from her, every person who had ever smiled at her on the street, every person who had whispered about her behind her back that last year. Everyone wore black. Everyone was quiet. The church itself felt wrong that day. It was a big, domed building, older than most of the houses in town. It always had a faint smell of wax and old wood. Normally it felt solemn, but comforting. That day it felt ominous. The chaplain stood at the pulpit, looking down over the platform beneath him. There was a coffin there, plain and dark, sitting in front of the altar like a heavy piece of furniture. And the coffin was making noise. It wasn't subtle. It rattled ceaselessly, a steady shaking from inside, like something was hitting the lid from within. The sound echoed through the church, bouncing off the high ceiling. It was impossible to ignore, except everyone did. People sat still, staring forward. No gasps, no whispers, no turning heads. Nobody looked alarmed. Nobody even looked confused. It was like the rattling was a normal part of a funeral service, like the coffin always did that, and you were expected to act polite about it. I remember looking at my parents, waiting to see fear on their faces. My mother's eyes were fixed on the front. My father's jaw was tight. Neither of them reacted. The chaplain began to speak in his calm, practiced voice. He talked about Miss Rosebud's service to the community, how many children had learned to love reading because of her, how kind and pure her heart was. He spoke about the cruel disease that had ravaged her in her final year. All the while, the coffin rattled, and then it got worse. Sobs and grunts and whimpers began to come from inside the coffin, muffled sounds like someone crying through fabric, like someone trying to speak with their mouth covered. The sounds rose and fell, sometimes turning into frantic struggling that shook the entire casket. The chaplain didn't stop. The congregation didn't move. It felt unreal, like I'd slipped into a bad dream where the rules of normal life had been quietly removed. Eventually, the service ended, and people began to line up to view the body. I was terrified, but I was also curious in the way kids sometimes are when they're scared. I watched the adults approach the coffin one by one. They leaned in. They made respectful faces. They nodded gently. They moved along. Nobody looked surprised. Nobody looked sick. Nobody ran. When it was my turn, I felt my legs go stiff. I stepped closer. The casket was still rattling, though not as violently now, as if whatever was inside had run out of strength. I had to tiptoe to see into it. I wish I hadn't. Miss Rosebud was inside, but not like a body, not like a peaceful dead person. She was bound and gagged, strapped down to the floorboard of the coffin like someone had packed her in. Her skin was pale, almost gray. Her body looked emaciated, like she'd wasted away. But she was alive in every way that mattered. Her chest moved. Her eyes were open. Her hands twitched against restraints. When our eyes met, she stopped struggling. For a second, everything went quiet in my head, like my brain couldn't hold sound anymore. She stared into me the way she had that day on the street, like she was searching me, checking me, reading me. Then she shook her head, slow and desperate, like she was saying, "No, no, no." Someone behind me pushed my shoulder gently, guiding me forward, and I stumbled away like I was leaving the edge of a cliff. That was the last time I saw her up close. Later that day, they lowered the casket into the grave. I stood with my parents among the crowd as the ropes creaked and the coffin sank down into the earth. The sun was bright, the kind of bright that makes you squint, and it felt wrong to have that much daylight on something so dark. At some point, she managed to bite through the gag. Her voice came out, cracked and raw, but clear enough to understand. She begged for forgiveness. She begged for mercy. She begged for her life. Then after a moment, her begging changed. Like she had finally understood something. She begged to die. She screamed it over and over. "Please, please, please." The first clumps of soil hit the coffin lid with dull thuds, and her screams rose so loud that some of the loose dirt seemed to jump from the vibration. Nobody reacted. No one even flinched. People stood there with calm faces while she begged for death from inside the box they were burying. Like they couldn't hear it. Like their ears didn't work. Like something in them had been turned off a long time ago. I watched my mother's face, hoping for horror, for compassion, for anything human. She just stared at the grave like it was normal. A month later, Miss Rosebud returned. I saw her on the street in broad daylight, smiling again, laughing and singing as she moved through town like a happy little bird. She wasn't bundled up. She wasn't hunched. She looked neat again, like the librarian I remembered. She greeted people. She waved. She sounded warm and melodic. And nobody acted like anything was strange. No one said, "How are you alive?" No one screamed. No one called the police. No one fell to their knees and prayed. They smiled back at her, as if she had simply been away on a trip, as if a funeral hadn't happened, as if a grave hadn't been filled. I didn't ask. Not because I didn't want answers, but because the world around me made it clear that asking was dangerous. The town had rules I didn't understand, and every adult seemed to follow them without even thinking. If I asked, I would be the only one making noise in a room where silence was enforced. It has been 13 years since that day. I have never left my hometown. I never plan to try. Not because I love it here, not because I'm loyal, but because somewhere deep down I believe leaving isn't an option. I think the town is a closed loop, a place that keeps what it has. I think that year proved it. When my family suddenly stopped traveling and every plan died quietly before it started. And the worst thought, the one I don't say out loud, the one that sits in my chest like a stone, is this. I believe I'm the only one left. Not left in the sense of being alone on the street. There are still people here. They talk. They work. They shop. They laugh at jokes. They go to church. They wave when they see me. They live their lives like everything is fine. But when I look at them now, when I really look, I get that same chill I felt the day Miss Rosebud stopped smiling. Like I'm watching something that knows how to imitate life without actually being alive. Like I'm the only one who can still hear the coffin rattling. Story 4. My roommate doesn't seem to like me very much, and I've been trying for a long time to understand why. When I first moved in, I did what you're supposed to do. I introduced myself. I kept my voice polite and light. The kind of tone you use when you don't want to take up too much space in someone else's life. The second he saw me, he startled so badly he nearly fell out of his chair. It wasn't a normal jump either. It was the kind of full-body flinch you see when someone thinks they're about to be hit. His chair scraped back, his hands flew up, and for a second, I thought he was going to scream. I chuckled under my breath without meaning to, more out of surprise than anything else. Then I tried to apologize. I told him I didn't mean to sneak up on him. I tried to reassure him, tried to make it easy and normal, but he didn't respond the way most people do. He stood up fast, eyes wide, and left the room like he couldn't get away from me quickly enough. At first, I told myself he was just anxious. Some people are socially awkward. Some people don't like roommates. Some people have their own issues, and you happen to arrive in the middle of them. I didn't take it personally right away, but it didn't get better. It got worse in small, sharp ways that made the house feel less like a shared place and more like a place where I wasn't welcome. One day I came across him watching TV in the living room. The air felt stale, like the curtains hadn't been opened in days. He was sitting rigidly, staring at the screen, barely blinking. I tried again. I gave him what I thought was a harmless greeting. "Hey," I said, How's your day been? He didn't look at me. He didn't answer. He just grabbed the remote and turned the volume up so loud the sound started to distort. The voices on the TV warped into harsh, tinny noise. It wasn't even about watching the show anymore. It felt like he was trying to drown out my voice, like he couldn't stand hearing me speak. I stood there for a moment, embarrassed in a way I hadn't felt since I was a kid. Then I walked away. After that, I only tried a few more times. I'd say hi when I passed him in the hall. I'd offer small talk in the kitchen. I'd ask if he wanted me to pick up anything from the store. Each time he acted like he hadn't heard me at all. Not even a nod, not even a grunt. Like I was air. The one time I tried something more direct, it went badly enough that I stopped trying altogether. I was walking behind him in the hallway, and he was blocking the way, moving slowly, like he was afraid to step into the next room. I didn't want to brush past him, so I did what anyone would do. I tapped his shoulder lightly just to let him know I needed to get by. He practically jumped out of his skin. He spun around so fast I barely saw his face. His expression was pure panic, like I'd grabbed him by the throat instead of touching him with 2 fingers. He ran to his room, slammed the door, and then I heard something heavy being dragged across the floorboards. The sound rumbled through the house, low and ugly, like furniture being pulled into place. A barricade. A warning. After that, I stopped touching him. I stopped trying to be friendly. I kept to myself because whatever was happening with him wasn't the kind of thing you fix with politeness. His housekeeping didn't make up for any of it either. He was awful to live with. If he'd been clean, maybe the tension wouldn't have felt so suffocating. But the place was a mess in a way that felt purposeful, like neglect had become part of his routine. He rarely cleaned up after himself. Dishes piled high in the sink. Food stains crusted onto plates and hardened into something that smelled sour even after the water ran. Dust sat on every surface, thick enough that if you dragged a finger through it, you'd leave a clean line behind. The air had that old, closed-in smell of paper and stale takeout and something faintly metallic that I couldn't identify. The strangest part, though, was what he'd done to the windows. Every window in the house was covered with old newspapers, taped and layered until almost no light came through. It wasn't just a few pieces here and there. It was thorough, like he was trying to seal the house off from the world. The living room always looked like a late evening, even in the middle of the day. The kitchen felt dim and cold, like a basement. He'd taken down all the mirrors, too. Not just the bathroom mirror. Everything reflective. Anything shiny was gone. There wasn't a single piece of metal cutlery left. No spoons, no forks. Everything was plastic. Even the cheap, flimsy kind that bends when you try to eat with it. I didn't understand it. At first I thought maybe he had some kind of sensory issue or some fear of being watched. Maybe he hated sunlight. Maybe he had migraines. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, because people can be strange for reasons that make sense to them. But one afternoon I tried peeling some of the newspaper off a window, just a corner, just enough to let in a little light. He screamed at me. It wasn't an annoyed shout. It was panic and rage together, sharp and desperate. He ran into the room, face twisted, and yelled until I backed away and put my hands up like I'd been caught stealing. His eyes were wild. His voice shook. He didn't just want me to stop. He needed me to stop. I stopped. He retreated to his room, slammed the door, and stayed there for a while. When I checked the window again an hour later, the paper had been replaced. Not roughly, not hastily. Neat layers taped down carefully, like he'd fixed a tear in his own skin. That was when I really started keeping to myself. If he wanted darkness and silence and separation, fine. I could live around him. I could do my own thing. I could wait out the lease and move on. Of course, I still bumped into him. You can't live with someone without crossing paths. But he never stayed in the same room with me for long. If I walked into the kitchen, he left. If I stepped into the hall, he went back into his room. It started to feel like a pattern, like the house was divided into safe zones and unsafe zones, and I was always on the wrong side of the line. At one point, I thought maybe the problem was startling him. He seemed so jumpy, so afraid of sudden presence, that I tried to be considerate. I started announcing where I was and where I was going. If I was walking down the hall, I'd clear my throat or call out lightly, like, "Hey, I'm coming through," or "I'm heading to the kitchen." I thought it would help. It made things worse. He began whispering to himself when he heard me, always too quiet to make out, but the rhythm was the same each time, like a repeated phrase, a mantra, something he'd learned to say to keep himself from breaking. It was unsettling in a way I can't fully describe, because it wasn't angry whispering, it was frightened whispering, the sound of someone trying to convince their own brain of something. So I stopped doing that too. The one relief I had was that he didn't come anywhere near my room. He barely acknowledged that part of the house even existed. My bedroom became my only safe space, the place where I could shut the door and breathe without feeling like I was making someone panic just by existing. He was home all day, every day, or he used to be. 3 days ago, I was in my room when I heard a loud bang on the front door downstairs. Not a normal knock, a heavy odor of a fist or boot. The door burst open right after, followed by multiple footsteps, quick and purposeful. Voices. More than one person. I stayed where I was, sitting on my bed, trying to decide if I should go see what was happening or stay out of it. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't even know if this was something dangerous or something official. The house had been so quiet and strange for so long that any sudden noise felt like a threat. A soft voice floated up the stairs. A woman's voice, muffled but firm, like someone trained to speak calmly in tense situations. I heard a few more words exchanged, then another loud bang, and then I heard my roommate sobbing. It got louder, like he was fighting, like he was pleading, and then it faded again as if they were pulling him away from where he'd been hiding. That's when I understood. He was being taken. Not going out willingly, being taken somewhere. I ran to the front window upstairs without thinking. My hands tore at the newspaper on the glass, ripping it down fast, desperate for a view. The outside light hit my eyes hard, and for a second, I couldn't focus. Then I saw it clearly. An ambulance in front of the house. My roommate was being carried out, held by medics. He looked thinner than I'd realized. His face was wet with tears, and his body was rigid with terror. A few neighbors stood on the sidewalk watching. Some had hands over their mouths. Some had their heads lowered, like they couldn't bear to look directly. I didn't even know we had neighbors. I hadn't seen anyone in so long that the street had started to feel like a painted backdrop. My roommate thrashed and cried as they loaded him into the ambulance. Then, right before they shut the doors, he lifted his arm and pointed back at the house. At me. Not generally. Not vaguely. Directly at the upstairs window where I stood. His eyes were huge. His mouth moved like he was trying to say something, but his voice didn't carry through the glass and the noise. One of the medics followed his pointing and looked up. For a moment, the medic's gaze landed on me. Their face tightened. They shivered, rubbing their arms like they'd stepped into a cold draft. Then they looked away and returned their attention to my roommate, like whatever they'd just felt wasn't worth thinking about. The ambulance doors closed. The engine started. The vehicle pulled away. No one came back for me. No one asked if there was anyone else inside. No one checked the rooms. No one even looked up again. They left me there. For the first time since I can remember, I was alone in the house. At first I told myself it would be temporary. People get taken to the hospital, they get evaluated, then they come back. Or they get help. Or they call family. Or something. But 3 days passed. The house stayed quiet in a way that made my ears ring. With him gone, the place felt empty, but not peaceful. It felt like a stage after the actors have left, still lit, still waiting, like something is supposed to happen next. I kept expecting to hear the heavy, dragging sound behind his door. I kept expecting the TV to blast too loud. I kept expecting him to appear in the hall, flinch, and run away from me. But nothing happened. I didn't really like him, but he had been a constant. His fear had filled the house like smoke, and now that it was gone, the silence felt thin, like it could tear. I did something I'm not proud of. I went into his room. I had never stepped foot in there before. Not once. It felt wrong to cross that boundary when he was alive and present. But now his door was wide open, and the emptiness of the house pressed on me until curiosity became a kind of pressure I couldn't ignore. The floorboards in the hallway leading into his room were worn down in grooves, deep tracks running from the doorway to his dresser. It looked like something heavy had been dragged back and forth so many times it had carved the wood. That alone made my skin crawl, because it matched the sound I'd heard the night he slammed his door and barricaded himself inside. His room was in a state that was beyond messy. It looked like someone had been slowly burying themselves. Newspapers were piled high in each corner, stacks leaning like unstable walls. Empty takeout containers were scattered across the carpet, some crushed, some open, their contents long gone and replaced by mold. The smell was awful, sweet and rotten at the same time. Flies buzzed somewhere, not frantic, just persistent like they had all the time in the world. I didn't want to think too much about what was under the piles, what might have attracted them. The only area that looked intentionally kept was his desk. It was cleaner than the rest of the room, like it was the one place he still had control. A laptop sat open in the center. Behind it, a corkboard was pinned with notes and printed papers, most of them messy and overlapping. I stepped closer and touched the laptop, waking it up. It asked for a password. I leaned in, scanning the notes on the corkboard for a hint. But before I could really search, my fingers moved on their own. That's the only way I can explain it. There was no thought, no trial and error, just certainty. I typed in numbers, 020226. The laptop unlocked. For a moment, I just stared at the screen because I didn't remember learning that password. I didn't remember him ever telling it to me. I didn't even remember seeing his hands type it. And yet my fingers had known. The desktop was chaotic. Files everywhere. Saved text documents, links, notes. The kind of mess you get when someone is trying desperately to hold their mind together with whatever tools they have. I clicked through a few things. There were links about grief, about coping, about anxiety, about trauma, self-help articles, forums, advice pages. Then I found the searches that made my stomach tighten. Seeing things, hearing voices, feeling presences, unwanted spirits, exorcisms, ways to protect your home, religious rituals, psychic cleansing, hallucinations versus hauntings. It wasn't one or two desperate late-night searches. It was dozens. He had been circling the same terror over and over, looking for a name for it, looking for a way out. I felt a sharp regret then, surprising and unpleasant. I regretted never forcing a real conversation with him. I regretted backing off so easily. Maybe if I had pushed harder, I could have helped. Then I opened the text documents. They were dated like a journal. The first entry I clicked was from March 28th, 2026. He wrote about a therapist telling him to keep a journal, like he was a teenage girl, like writing could fix what was happening to him. He described still seeing it, still hearing it, still smelling it. Burning oil, rubber, something else underneath. He wrote that he wanted it to stop, that he wished he had them back, that he was sorry. The entry ended with his name, Elias. I read another entry from a few days later, March 31st. Elias wrote that he kept seeing it standing there, watching him. It didn't do anything, it just watched. He said it was better when it was dark because he couldn't see it in the dark. He wrote that he'd blocked the windows and taken down the mirrors and that if he stopped looking, maybe it would leave him alone. I clicked April 1st. He wrote that it spoke to him. It said hello. He described the voice as garbled, like an amalgamation of voices, and he wondered if his imagination was being cruel. He wrote that he left the room so he wouldn't have to hear it again, and he didn't know where it went. I clicked April 2nd. Elias wrote that it was growing bolder. He said he saw it drift into the living room out of the corner of his eye. He said it sat in the space next to him, and he could feel it close. He wrote that he kept his eyes on the TV and told himself to ignore it, and it would go away. Then he wrote a line that made my mouth go dry. He said it tried asking him about his day, and that it sounded so much like them he barely held it together. He wrote that he turned the volume up louder so he couldn't hear it, and he said he was sure he'd get complaints, but he couldn't stomach another word. I clicked April 3rd. Elias wrote that it touched him, physically touched him. He wrote that it wasn't in his head. He wrote that it crept up behind him and touched him, and he called it a bastard, and he said he ran to his room and barricaded his door. He wrote that it couldn't get him in there, that he knew it couldn't. My stomach turned because I remembered tapping his shoulder. I remembered how he'd reacted. I clicked April 4th. Elias wrote that it tried to peel off the newspapers. He wrote that it wanted him to see it, that it was trying to torment him, that it wanted to torment him. Then he wrote that he stared at its face too long and could make out features. He wrote of all of them, and then he listed small details like someone trying to name what they're seeing so it doesn't swallow them. Her nose, his wide, innocent eyes, and then he wrote something that felt like a punch. "Oh, my sweet boy, I'm so sorry I've made you into this thing." He ended that entry by writing that he needed to make it dark again. I clicked April 5th. He wrote that ignoring it seemed to be working. He said he hadn't seen much of it lately, and when he did, he left immediately, and it left him alone. He wrote that it didn't follow, didn't talk to him. He wrote that he thought it was finally working, and he repeated that he'd be okay, that he was going to be okay. I clicked April 6th. That entry was different. It was frantic. Elias wrote no over and over. He wrote that it was telling him where it was in the house. He wrote why in all caps, like the question was tearing him open. He wrote that it couldn't tell he didn't want it there, that he wanted it gone, out of his life. Then he wrote the same phrase again and again till it became meaningless. "I'll be okay. I'm gonna be okay. I'll be okay. I'm gonna be okay." The text went on like that, repeated until the last line ended mid-thought, like someone had been pulled away from the keyboard. That was the day they took him. I sat back in the desk chair, breathing shallowly, feeling like I'd just read something I wasn't meant to read. The house around me felt colder than it had a minute ago, even though nothing had changed. The dimness of the room seemed heavier, like the newspapers had absorbed the daylight and refused to let it back out. I closed the files. My hands were shaking, but not with fear in the way I expected. It was something else, something unsettled, like my body was remembering something my mind couldn't name. I powered the laptop down. As the screen went black, I saw my reflection for the first time. A face stared back at me, warped slightly by the angle of the dark screen. The eyes were the first thing I noticed. Wide, a little misaligned, like they didn't sit perfectly even. Innocent in a way that made my chest ache. I tilted my head to the side slowly, the way a dog does when it's curious. The reflection tilted too. I stared, trying to understand what I was seeing. My own face should not have felt unfamiliar to me, and yet it did, like I was looking at something I hadn't seen in a long time. Or like I was seeing it the way someone else saw it. I snapped the laptop shut. My eyes drifted to the corkboard behind it. There was one note bigger than the rest, placed dead center like it was the anchor for everything. It was a printed headline. February 2nd, 2026. Fatal crash on I-95. Father sole survivor. Below the headline was a picture of wreckage, twisted metal, and shattered glass. Underneath that were two smaller photos of a woman and a little boy. I recognized their faces. Not because I'd seen them in the house, but because something in me knew them. A familiarity that wasn't a memory exactly, more like a pull in my chest. I stood there for a long time, staring at the photos, listening to the quiet hum of the house settling. The only sound was a faint buzzing of flies somewhere under the newspaper piles. Elias is his name, I thought. Elias was my roommate's name. I wondered when Elias was coming back. I didn't know why I wanted him back exactly. He didn't like me. He treated me like I was poison. But now that he was gone, the house felt hollow. Like it had lost the one person who could see me, even if seeing me destroyed him. I opened the laptop again. I shouldn't have, but I did. I'm writing this now to ask, does anyone know where they take people like that? People who scream a lot? People who get dragged out of their houses by medics while pointing at empty air? I want to say I'm sorry. Maybe Elias will come back. I need him back. And there's something else I don't know how to explain without sounding wrong. Since he left, I felt hungry in a way I can't remember feeling before. Not normal hunger, not the kind food fixes. It's deeper, like an emptiness under my ribs, like I'm missing something that was here and now isn't. I don't know what I am without him in this house. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now that I'm alone. Story 5. There's an old urban legend in my town that people have been whispering about for as long as I can remember. It's the kind of story that gets told in pieces, never all at once, usually late at night when someone wants to make the room feel colder. The details change depending on who's talking, but the main part stays the same. A little girl who never grew up. They say she died in the summer of 1963 during the county fair. In my town, the county fair used to be a big deal. Not the kind of thing you stop by for an hour, but an event people planned their whole week around. Families saved money for it. Teenagers treated it like the center of the universe. Even adults who complained about crowds still went. Because it was tradition. Because it was normal. Because it made you feel like you belonged to something. The legend says the little girl collapsed on the carousel. One version says she'd been begging her parents for one more ride until they gave in. Another version says she was already on the horse when she started coughing and turned the color of paper. There are people who swear their grandparents saw it happen, that they watched her slump forward and slide off the saddle like her bones suddenly stopped working. Doctors later claimed it was some strange illness. Some said her heart. Some said fever. Some said it was one of those fast infections that hits children before anyone understands what's happening. But the more you hear the story, the clearer it becomes that nobody really knew. And in towns like mine, when nobody knows, people fill the blank with whatever scares them most. Her family was devastated. That part never changes. They buried her quickly, almost too quickly, as if speed could make grief easier. The detail everyone remembers is what she was wearing. Her favorite frilly pink dress, the one she wore whenever she wanted to feel pretty. The one she insisted on, even when her mother told her it wasn't practical. And then there's the part people lower their voices for. Some say she wasn't dead yet. It's hard to tell how that idea started. Maybe it came from guilt, because the town watched a child die and couldn't do anything. Maybe it came from someone who wanted the story to have teeth. Or maybe it came from a simple human fear that we can be wrong about something as final as death. The legend goes on to say that if you walk alone near the abandoned fairgrounds at night, you'll hear footsteps behind you, soft and uneven, like a child walking in stiff patent shoes. If you stop and turn, there won't be anyone there. The path will look empty. The shadows will look normal. The wind will move through weeds and you'll tell yourself it's just nerves. But if you keep walking, the footsteps come back a little closer. And if she speaks to you, you must never answer. That rule is always said, like it's the only thing that matters. Like everything else is just decoration. People act almost superstitious about it, like even repeating the rule out loud can invite something into your life. The older kids would tell it to scare the younger ones, and the younger one would pretend not to care, but they'd avoid the place anyway. I used to laugh it off. A ghost in a pink dress sounded like small-town nonsense to me. It sounded like the kind of story that survives because it's convenient, because it gives people something to talk about when life is quiet and nothing much changes. I didn't believe in ghosts. Not truly. I believed in fear, in imagination, in the way a dark place can make your brain invent shapes. I believed in how people pass stories down until they feel real. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. It doesn't go away just because you tell yourself you're too smart for it. The fairgrounds had been shut down for years by the time I was old enough to care. The county moved the fair to a bigger area closer to the highway. The old lot got left behind, slowly eaten by weather and time. It was fenced off in places, but not well enough to stop anyone who really wanted to go in. Most people didn't. Not because they believed the legend, but because the place was dangerous in a normal way. Rusted metal, broken boards, nails, holes in the pavement. Still, the thought of it lived in my head. The little girl, the rule about not answering. The detail about the pink dress, as if color could survive burial. One summer night, I decided to test it for myself. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself it was just a walk. I told myself I was proving something. Not to anyone else, but to the part of me that still felt small when I heard the story as a kid. It was late enough that the streets were quiet. The kind of late where even the usual night noises feel lower, like the world has turned the volume down. The sky was clear, but moonlight only helps so much when you're surrounded by trees and old structures that block it. I parked farther away than I needed to, partly because I didn't want my car near the fence like a sign saying someone was there. I brought a flashlight, even though using it made me feel like a cliché. I held it in my hand and walked toward the old entrance, my shoes scuffing lightly on dirt and gravel. The fairgrounds looked worse up close. During the day, if you drove past, you could convince yourself it was just an old lot. At night, it felt like a graveyard for things that once made people happy. Rotting wood stands leaned inward like tired shoulders. Weeds grew through cracks in the pavement like veins. Rusted ride parts caught the light in sudden flashes, then vanished back into shadow. The Ferris wheel still stood, mostly intact, but it looked wrong without movement. Like a crown on the head of something dead. The metal spokes were dark, and in the moonlight they made a pattern that reminded me of ribs. The carousel was there too, or what was left of it. The poles were bent and splintered. The horses were frozen mid-gallop, their paint peeling, their carved faces warped by weather. Some had missing ears. Some had cracked necks. The platform beneath them sagged slightly, like the ground itself was tired of holding them up. The air smelled like damp earth and mildew, that sour, wet smell you get in basements and under porches. Cicadas buzzed so loudly it almost felt like static in my ears. I stepped through a gap in the fence and onto the cracked pavement that used to guide crowds from ride to ride. My flashlight beam shook a little, and I tightened my grip, annoyed at my own nerves. At first, there was nothing. Just the crunch of gravel under my own shoes, the sound of my breathing. the distant buzz of insects and the occasional rustle of weeds. I walked slowly, letting my eyes adjust. I tried to enjoy the fact that I wasn't scared. I tried to feel smug about it, like I'd already won. Then I heard it. Tap, 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 soft, light, and behind me. I froze so hard my shoulders ached. My first thought was that it was an animal. A raccoon, maybe. A stray cat. Something small, stepping on pavement or broken glass. The night seemed to hold its breath around me. Even the cicadas felt quieter for a moment, like the whole place was listening. I turned slowly, forcing myself to be calm. There was nothing there. Just the empty path behind me, weeds moving gently at the edges, rusted gates casting thin shadows. No child, no dress, no face. My heartbeat slowed, and I almost laughed at myself. Wind, I whispered, though I didn't really believe it. Wind doesn't tap like that. Wind doesn't follow a rhythm. I told myself I was hearing my own footsteps delayed, echoing strangely. I told myself the sound could be coming from somewhere else, bouncing off metal. Then I turned forward again and continued walking. For a few seconds, it was quiet. Then, tap, 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 closer. Not loud, just closer, like whoever or whatever was making the sound had shaved off distance without effort. My stomach dropped so suddenly it felt like missing a step on stairs. My throat went dry. The flashlight beam jittered across the pavement as my hand trembled. I stopped again, and the tapping stopped too. I stood still, trying to make sense of the timing. It felt responsive, like it knew when I was listening. When I turned, I still saw nothing. But this time, the darkness looked deeper than it should have. Like the shadows were thicker, layered. The empty spaces between structures felt crowded in a way that made my skin tighten. I turned back around quickly and started walking faster, not running yet, but moving with intention. My brain repeated the rule in a simple loop. Don't answer, don't answer, don't answer. The tapping returned. Tap, tap, tap. Now it was so close it sounded like it was right behind my shoulder. I spun around, flashlight swinging, and that's when I saw her. She couldn't have been older than 10, maybe younger. She stood a few yards away, just far enough that my brain still wanted to deny what my eyes were seeing. Her skin was pale in a grayish way, not like a living child, more like paper left in water too long. Shadows sat under her eyes like bruises. Her hair hung limp, tangled and dull, and it clung to her head as if it were damp. Her dress was pink, but faded, the kind of pink that looks like it's been washed too many times. It had once been frilly, the kind of dress a child would spin in, so the fabric flared out. Now it was frayed and dirty. Dirt clung to the folds. The hem looked heavy, like it had been dragging through wet ground. Her head tilted to the side at an angle that made my neck hurt just looking at it. She studied me with an expression I can only describe as hollow curiosity, like a child trying to understand a toy that doesn't work. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs locked. My body turned cold and heavy, like fear had poured cement into my joints. She took one step forward, and I heard the sound again, her shoes against the pavement. That soft, uneven tap. The smell hit me then. Soil, wet earth, a faint sweetness underneath, like old flowers left too long in a vase. And something else I didn't want to name, something that reminded me of basements and rot. She spoke. Her voice was thin and dry, like leaves scraping over concrete. "Have you seen my mommy?" she whispered. The words weren't loud. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. That made it worse because it felt like she wasn't trying to scare me. It felt like she meant it, like she really expected an answer. My mouth went numb. My tongue felt too large. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, hard and fast. She stepped closer, and her shoes scraped lightly as she moved. I saw small things falling from the folds of her dress. Bits of dirt, tiny strand of grass. For a second, I thought I saw something pale drop onto the pavement and wriggle, and my stomach lurched. I forced my eyes away from it. "I can't find her," she whispered. "Will you help me?" The rules slammed through my mind like an alarm. Don't answer. It wasn't a superstition anymore. It was a command. It felt like the only thing standing between me and something I couldn't fix. I wanted to keep my lips closed. I wanted to shake my head and back away. I wanted to run. But fear does strange things to people. Sometimes it makes you scream. Sometimes it makes you freeze. And sometimes it makes you do the exact wrong thing just to break the tension, just to make the moment normal again. My lips betrayed me. A word slipped out before I could stop it. "No." The second the sound left my mouth, the night felt like it changed. It wasn't dramatic like in movies where the wind howls and the lights flicker. It was subtler than that, which somehow made it more real. The air went heavy, like pressure dropping before a storm. The cicadas went quiet, as if something had silenced them. The little girl's expression twisted, her jaw unhinged, wider than anything human should be able to do. The skin around her mouth stretched, splitting at the corners, and I saw darkness inside that didn't look like a throat. It looked like an opening. Her eyes rolled white, and her voice became wrong. It wasn't one voice anymore. It was layered. A chorus of echoes that sounded like it was rising from underneath the ground, from beneath the pavement, from beneath the whole fairground. "Then stay with me instead." Her hand shot out and grabbed mine. Her skin felt cold and rough, gritty with dirt. Her fingers clamped around my wrist with strength that didn't belong to a child. The grip didn't feel like a living hand. It felt like something that had learned the shape of a hand but didn't have warmth in it. I tried to pull away. My feet scrambled backward on the cracked pavement, but it didn't matter. The moment she touched me, it felt like the ground itself was pulling at my body. I stumbled, and my flashlight beam swung wildly across rusted metal and weeds. The shadows jumped and stretched. For a split second, I thought I saw more shapes standing beyond her, just outside the edge of the light, thin figures, still and watching. But my brain refused to hold the image. Her grip tightened. I felt myself being dragged, not forward exactly, but down, like the pavement had turned soft and wanted to swallow me. My knees hit the ground hard. My free hand clawed at the cracks, nails scraping stone, but the surface felt like it was giving way. The smell of soil intensified, filling my nose and throat. I gagged. Dirt pressed against my skin. The world narrowed into darkness and pressure, and the sound of my own breathing turning into panicked gasps. I remember the sense of being buried while still awake. The terrible confusion of it, the disbelief, the thought that this couldn't be happening because the ground doesn't do that. Reality doesn't do that. Then the darkness closed completely. I don't know how long I was gone. It felt like minutes and also like hours. Time didn't feel stable. My thoughts drifted in and out, and every time I tried to grab onto a memory, it slipped away. When I woke, the sun was rising. I was lying on the fairground path like I'd passed out there. The sky was pale, the kind of early morning light that makes everything look washed out and innocent. Birds were calling in the trees, and for a moment the world looked normal enough that I almost believed it had all been a nightmare. Then I tried to sit up. My throat was raw, like I'd been screaming. My mouth tasted like dirt. My fingernails were caked with soil, packed underneath as though I'd been digging into the earth with my bare hands. My palms were scraped and stained brown. My knees hurt. My wrists ached. I stared at my hands for a long time, breathing hard, trying to understand how I could have that much dirt on me if I'd only been walking on pavement. Then I saw it. Around my wrist was a pink ribbon tied in a perfect bow. It wasn't dirty. It wasn't frayed. It looked new, like it had been taken from a gift bag. The pink was bright, almost cheerful, and that brightness made my stomach twist. It didn't belong out there among rot and rust and weeds. I tried to pull it off. The knot wouldn't loosen. I didn't want to keep touching it, so I left it for the moment and forced myself to stand. My legs shook as I walked back toward the fence, my flashlight forgotten somewhere behind me. The fairground looked different in daylight, less haunted, more broken. The carousel horses looked pathetic instead of frightening. The Ferris wheel looked like scrap metal. But as I walked, I kept glancing back, expecting to see the little girl standing between rides watching. I didn't see her. That didn't comfort me. It made me feel like she didn't need to be seen anymore. I got to my car and drove home with my windows down, trying to get the smell of damp earth out of my nose. The sunlight felt too bright. The normal morning traffic felt too ordinary. Every person I passed looked like they were a part of a different world, one where the rules made sense. I told myself I'd go home, shower, sleep, and when I woke up, I'd laugh at how my brain had panicked. I told myself I'd explain the dirt under my nails as a fall. I told myself the ribbon could have gotten tied on me somehow, that maybe I brushed against something. But none of my explanations held. When I finally told someone, carefully, casually, like I didn't want them to think I was unstable, they laughed. They said it was just a story. They said I probably scared myself and fell down, and my mind filled in the rest. One person joked that I should write horror fiction. Another told me I should stop watching creepy videos before bed. Even when I showed the ribbon, they smiled like it was a prank. Cute, someone said. Did you buy that at a craft store? I stopped talking about it after that. There's a certain kind of loneliness that comes from knowing something happened to you and realizing no one will hold it with you. They'll either laugh or pity you, and both reactions feel like being pushed away. But the ribbon stayed. I tried cutting it off with scissors. The blade snagged and slid as if the ribbon was tougher than it should be. I tried soaking it, trying to loosen the knot. It stayed perfect, like it didn't belong to normal fabric. Eventually, I stopped trying because every time I touched it too long, I felt sick. Sometimes late at night, when I'm lying in bed and the house is quiet, I hear it again outside my window. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, uneven, like a child in patent shoes walking on pavement. I don't get up to look anymore. I don't open the curtains. I don't check the street. I keep my eyes on the ceiling and focus on breathing. Because I've learned that some rules are real whether you believe in them or not. And I never answer. Not even in a whisper. Not even to myself. Story 6. Tomorrow looks beautiful across South Florida. Plenty of sunshine, warm temperatures, and just a light breeze off the water. If you've got outdoor plans, tomorrow's the day to make them. The anchor finished with a big smile. I turned off the TV and sat there for a minute, letting the silence settle. I should have been thinking about sleep. I had to be on site early. But I couldn't stop smiling to myself because tomorrow wasn't just another shift. Tomorrow was the first day of training for my childhood friend. Tyler and I had known each other since we were 5. We grew up door to door on the same street in Hialeah. Same schools, same corner stores, same walk home, same bored afternoons in the heat, same stupid ideas. We spent nights at each other's houses, played video games until our eyes hurt, and did plenty of things I'm not going to spell out because some memories are better left as blurry jokes. We were best friends in the simplest way. We got in trouble together. We chased girls at parties together. We got each other out of messes. If someone had a problem with one of us, they had a problem with both. All through high school, we had one plan. One clean, shiny plan we could point at whenever life felt messy. We were going into computer science together, cybersecurity, good jobs, good money. Either we'd build our own company or get hired by one of the big names and make more than our parents ever did. We talked about it like it was guaranteed. Like dreaming hard enough made it real. College was where everything cracked. Tyler was good at school in a way that made it look easy. He could sit down, focus, and actually absorb what he studied. I couldn't. I tried to keep up, but it wasn't just effort. Something in me didn't click the same way. I failed one exam, then another, then another. Every failure made the next one feel heavier. I decided to repeat the year. Tyler didn't laugh. He didn't look down on me. He stayed supportive the whole time. Man, it's just 1 year, he told me. Focus up and we keep moving. I'll scout things out in the meantime, get a job, and either pull you in with me or we start something on our own. I really did try, for a while. Then money started getting tight at home. I had to find part-time work. I started missing study time, then missing classes. My grades got worse. Tyler's optimism carried me for a bit, but optimism can't sit in an exam and answer questions for you. Eventually, my professors stopped recognizing me. That's a weird feeling. Realizing you've been gone so long, the people teaching the class don't even know you're supposed to be there. By then, there wasn't a way to fix it. I dropped out. A neighbor got me a job in construction. He lived next door and had connections. He told me if I showed up at 6 in the morning, he could get me work as a helper on a job site in Brickell. Not a career, not a dream, but money. A paycheck in a week. So I showed up. The first year I hated it. I hated the heat and the dust and the way your muscles burn by mid-morning. I hated hauling tools, carrying bags of sand, moving concrete, lifting things that feel heavier the longer you hold them. I hated collapsing onto my bed at night like my body was shutting down just to survive another day. But after a while, I realized something. Hating it wasn't changing it. And if I was going to be there, I needed a plan again, even if it wasn't the plan Tyre and I had built when we were kids. So I changed my approach. Instead of just hauling things, I started watching how the site worked. I watched the machines. I watched the operators. I listened when foremen gave instructions. I started thinking about the jobs that paid better and required skill. The jobs where your brain mattered again. I enrolled in courses. I did training. I did my practicals. It took time, 2 years of effort, but I finally became a crane operator. That was the first time since college that I felt proud of myself. Not because it was glamorous, but because I earned it, and because it wasn't easy. After I dropped out, Tyler and I didn't cut each other off, but we drifted. It started with fewer messages, then fewer meetups. Life got busy. Reality moved fast. It didn't feel like we were angry at each other. It just felt like we lived in different worlds now. He had the tech path. I had the hard hat path. Still, I missed him constantly. We were like brothers, and losing that closeness felt like losing a piece of my own history. One evening, I texted him out of nowhere and asked if he wanted to grab a beer. Just catch up. Just talk like we used to. He agreed almost immediately, which surprised me. I expected excuses. Too busy, too much work, something like that. But he said yes. So we met at a bar on Brickell Avenue. It was a Wednesday, not crowded. The kind of night where you can actually hear yourself think. At first, the conversation felt stiff. How have you been? Good. You? Good. Weather, relationships, health, everything except work. Work had become the thing we avoided because it carried the weight of what we didn't become together. 3 beers in, that stiffness loosened. We started laughing. We started telling stories from school, dumb memories, old jokes, the kind of stuff that makes you feel 13 again for a moment. Then Tyler opened another beer and said, flat as a brick hitting water, I lost my job. I blinked at him. What do you mean? He took a long pull from the bottle before he answered. Layoffs. I wasn't the only one. The market's crowded right now. Too many specialists. Too few jobs. Companies are cutting costs, and juniors were the first ones to go. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've sent out over 100 resumes, and I've gotten nothing back. 0. I looked at him properly then. Wrinkled shirt, tired eyes, stubble like he hadn't cared enough to shave. He looked worn down in a way I'd never seen on him. How long before rent becomes a problem? I asked. 2 months, he said. Maybe 3 if I stretch. The air between us got heavy. That quiet, uncomfortable wait where you want to say something helpful, but you don't have anything real to offer. Saying it'll be okay felt like a lie you tell someone when you don't want to sit with their fear. So instead I did what I always do when I don't know how to handle a serious moment. I tried to joke my way into a door. I forced a smile and said, forget it and come work construction with me. We need another crane operator. You can do accelerated courses. I'll talk to Paul. He's my boss. I'll get you an apprenticeship and then a spot. Tyler laughed, but it was half disbelief. How much does a crane operator make? With overtime, I said. I make about 120 a year. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. 120 grand? I nodded. He didn't smile like he was amused. He smiled like something in him woke up. All right, he said. I'm in. I thought he was joking. You mean that? Absolutely, he said. Man, I used to make 70. You tell me what to do. I'll do it. We drank a lot that night. I figured he'd sober up and change his mind. He didn't. For the next 6 weeks, he went all in. Classes, medical exams, paperwork, all of it. He was fired up in a way that reminded me of high school Tyler, the guy who believed effort could move mountains. Paul wasn't thrilled. He didn't like the idea of a brand new trainee on a serious project. 50 stories, heavy lifts, and a tight schedule is not where you want someone learning the basics. He told me Tyler was too green. I pushed anyway. I had made my friend a promise, and once I promise something, I have a hard time letting it go. I told Paul we'd known each other since we were kids. I told him I'd take full responsibility. Tyler would stay with me. He wouldn't touch controls alone. He would learn safely. And when he was ready, he'd be solid. Paul resisted for a while, but in the end, he agreed. Mostly because experienced operators are hard to find and expensive to hire. Training someone new is cheaper if you do it right. So tomorrow was our first real training day on the crane. That's why the weather forecast mattered so much. Crane work lives and dies by conditions. Wind, rain, lightning. Those aren't small issues. They are life or death issues. Morning came with exactly what the anchor promised. Clear sky, light southern breeze, no warnings, no dark horizon. Just Florida sunlight and that early morning glow that makes downtown Miami look unreal. Even after years on the job, dawn in that city still hits me. The glass towers catching the first light, the bay turning silver blue, the streets waking up slowly. It's beautiful in a way you don't appreciate when you're rushing through traffic. Tyler met me at the gate at 6:15. Hard hat, vest, boots that still looked too clean. He tried to look confident, but I could see nervous energy in his face. Ready? I asked. Conditions are perfect. He looked up at the crane, and his eyes stayed there too long. I don't know, he said. I laughed. That's the right answer. I'm going first. Climbing a tower crane that high can make your blood run cold, even if you've done it for years. The ladder is narrow. The safety cage feels thin. The whole structure is exposed to wind, and you feel the height in your body before your mind catches up. Most people with no experience keep talking for the first 60 to 100 feet. They joke, they ask questions, they try to act like it's nothing. Then, somewhere above that, they go quiet. That's when their brain finally understands what their eyes have been seeing. Once you've climbed a third of the way, every little gust of wind feels stronger than it does on the ground. Up there, the air doesn't just touch you. It pushes you. It tests your grip. The higher you go, the more you feel the crane move. Not a lot, but enough. Metal flexes. The whole thing sways a little with wind and weight, like a giant body balancing itself. Even in full sunlight, the metal gets colder and a little damp from morning humidity. Your hands feel it through your gloves. Above about 160 feet, your survival instinct starts yelling. Your mind begins throwing images at you, slipping, falling, losing grip, because that's what the human brain does when it sees a drop that could kill you. Tyler went quiet around 130 feet. Don't look down, I said without turning around. Look at my boots. That's it. Nothing else matters right now. Understand? He didn't answer, but I heard his breathing change. Shorter. Faster. When we finally got into the cab, he sat down like his legs didn't fully trust themselves. He stared at the floor, hands clenched. "You okay?" I asked, trying to sound amused. "Jesus," he said quietly, lifting his eyes. I put a hand on his shoulder. "Look around, man. Look how beautiful it is up here. You feel that unreal feeling? Like you're not supposed to be this high?" Miami spread out under us like a model. Biscayne Bay, Key Biscayne, the bridges, the skyline, the cars so small they looked like toys, the people like moving dots. It's the kind of view you'd pay for, and we were getting paid to sit inside it. "That feeling," Tyler said, swallowing, "is telling me to go back down." "You'll get used to it," I said. Then the radio crackled. "Crane 3, you're clear for the morning lifts." "That's us," I said, and I got to work. That day we were moving steel girders, long, heavy pieces that can turn deadly if you make one wrong move. People think crane work is just pulling levers. It's not. It's timing, angles, wind, load swing, coordination with riggers below. It's precision. You don't get to be sloppy. Tyler sat behind me and watched. Every so often I asked questions. What this gauge meant. Why I used that mode. How I could tell when the load was stable. I answered as I went, trying to teach him without losing focus. Hours passed like that. The wind stayed light and steady. The sky stayed clear. The radio stayed calm. Short confirmations, routine talk, nothing urgent. I was focused on the loading and unloading points, watching the site like a chessboard. Then I heard Tyler's voice behind me, strained and uneasy. "Man, look in front of you." I looked up. The sky had turned black. Not cloudy, not storm clouds rolling in. It was like someone had flipped a switch. One moment there had been blue sky and sun. The next moment the atmosphere looked bruised and heavy, and the light had dropped. No warning, no alert, no obvious horizon line with storms coming. Just sudden darkness. The air felt different immediately. Thick, pressurized, like the world was holding its breath. Then a hard blast of wind hit the cab. My heartbeat jumped. I glanced at the indicators. Wind speed shot from 12 miles per hour to 45 in what felt like seconds. Another slam of wind hit, and the cab rocked. I've worked in strong winds before. Anyone who does this job has. But this felt wrong, fast and violent in a way I hadn't seen. At 560 feet, even small movements feel huge. An 8-inch swing can feel like the cab will never come back. This time the cab swung sideways several feet and snapped back with a sharp jerk. Tyler grabbed the rail, knuckles white. Sweat shined on his forehead. "What the hell is this?" he asked, voice cracking. "In storm season, we get squalls sometimes," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It can hit hard and pass fast. Just hold on." But my voice came out higher than I wanted, and I hated myself for that, because Tyler heard it too. The radio suddenly came alive with overlapping voices. Then one voice cut through clear and loud. "All cranes abort lifts. Wind speeds exceeded. All cranes aboard immediately. This is not a drill." That snapped me into motion. I had a 26-foot steel girder on the hook. It was swinging harder and harder, and every second made it worse. I tried to set it down, but it was swinging too much to place safely. If I tried to drop it near the structure, it could smash into the building. If I tried to hold it, the swing would grow until it became uncontrollable. I tried to stabilize it, but the wind was fighting me. The joystick couldn't keep up with the way the line was moving in that air. There was one option left. I switched into weather vane mode and released the swing brake. In that mode, the crane boom isn't locked. It rotates freely with the wind, like a weather vane. It takes stress off the tower, but it also means you lose control over where the load wants to go. The wind decides. I watched the levers and the angles, trying to find the least bad position, trying to buy time for the crew below to evacuate. Then lightning flashed somewhere to the left, and thunder hit right after. The vibration shook the cab, and Tyler stood up like his body decided it couldn't sit still anymore. "We're getting the hell out of here," he said, shaking all over. "We're safer here," I told him. "Sit down." "That's bullshit," he snapped, moving toward the door. I grabbed his arm hard. "Tyler, listen to me. If you go out there now, climbing down in this wind on wet rungs, with lightning around us, you won't survive even a minute. Sit down. The cab is grounded. Protections are on. We're staying." He looked at me, eyes wild, and then his fear finally bent into obedience. "Okay," he said. "I'm sorry." He sat down again and stared at the floor. I turned back to the load and the storm. I could only raise or lower now. I couldn't steer the boom. I couldn't force control back. Lightning cracked again, closer. The air smelled sharp, like electricity. I told Tyler, "Don't touch metal. Stay where you are." Then I heard quick footsteps behind me. The cab door slammed open. I turned and my stomach dropped. Tyler was already at the ladder. I jumped up and lunged for the exit. "Get back here right now, you idiot!" I didn't finish the word. A tingling spread across my skin. A metallic taste filled my mouth. I looked down at my arm and saw the hair standing up. And then the world exploded. A white flash filled the cab. A shockwave hit like an invisible punch. Electronics spit sparks and smoke. The sound was so huge it hurt, like it reached inside my skull. The vibration went through my whole body. It reminded me, in a stupid way, of a Skrillex concert I'd been to once, standing too close to the speaker stack where every bass hit isn't something you hear. It's something your bones feel. Then I lost consciousness. When I came back, I was on the cab floor. Everything was dark except for quick flashes of light through damaged panels. There was a high ringing in my ears, so loud it felt like it was eating everything else. My mouth and nose tasted like metal, ozone, and burnt plastic. "Why am I on the floor?" I whispered. I pushed myself up slowly, disoriented, and then the truth landed in my head in pieces. Lightning had struck the crane. Not nearby, not a building. The crane itself. The mast tip, about 33 feet above the cab. Tyler had been outside. My legs went weak. I staggered to the cab door and looked through the small window. The platform was there. The ladder was there. Tyler wasn't. I looked down, but the clouds had dropped so low I couldn't see past maybe 10 rungs. Everything was a wall of wet gray. I couldn't see the building, the ground, the street. At 560 feet, inside a storm cloud, I could see maybe 20 feet in any direction. I leaned out and shouted, voice breaking, "Tyler!" The wind swallowed my voice like it was nothing. No answer. Just rain hitting steel and the low howl of wind through the lattice. I shut the cab door, hands shaking. The radio was damaged, but voices still broke through the static in fragments. "Loose load on 3. Watch it. Rapid evacuation. Watch the load." Then I felt a hard impact from below, muffled but heavy. I knew what that meant. The girder had hit something. A scream came over the radio, someone holding the transmit button down, repeating, "Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh, God," until someone else yelled for them to clear the channel and call medics. I sat by the burned console and stared into the fog, numb. I knew the falling steel wasn't my fault. I'd done what I could. But Tyler wasn't a load. Tyler was my friend. I brought him here. I promised I'd keep him safe. And now he was gone. The crane jerked hard. Not a normal sway, not rotation. A violent, uneven jerk that threw me into the panel. Pain shot through my shoulder. Something warm slid by my temple. I touched it and saw blood on my fingers, a cut from the panel edge. I grabbed the controls out of habit, but something was wrong. Weather vane mode should have let the boom rotate. It should have moved with the wind. Instead, the boom was stuck at an angle, not reacting the way it should. The swing mechanism had been damaged, probably from the strike. Now the crane wasn't acting like a flexible structure designed to survive wind. It was acting like a rigid sail taking full force. Wind speed climbed above 60. The whole tower began to shudder. Not the cab, the tower itself. Vibrations ran through the lattice in a frequency that made my teeth feel like they were buzzing. I felt it through my boots, through the seat, through my jaw. Then I heard the first ping, a high, distinct sound of metal under too much force. I'd heard it in training videos. The instructor's words came back to me in a cold flash. If you ever hear that, it's already too late to think about protocols. That's the sound telling you to run. But there was nowhere to run. The ladder was wet. Wind was still dangerous. The storm was still active. And below me was nothing but cloud and distance. My phone had no signal. The steel around me had turned the cab into a perfect cage, blocking everything. I sat there in the dim, burned-out cab and listened to the crane work under stress, like a giant animal trying to hold itself together. Another ping. I looked through the lower windows by my feet. Through rain and fog, I could see part of the tower lattice below. One of the main joints between sections looked distorted. Around the bolt holes, the steel gleamed fresh, like it had just cracked. I knew what that meant. Once one anchor bolt fails, the load transfers. Then the next fails faster. Then the next. It can cascade. A gust hit. The tower leaned by degrees, not inches. Loose things inside slid across the floor and hit the glass. The tempered pane by my feet cracked into a spiderweb pattern. I stared through that web down into swirling gray and understood something very simple and physical. The only thing between me and a 560-foot fall was a cracked pane of glass, a few bolts, and however long the steel decided to keep winning against the math. The storm ended as suddenly as it started. In Miami, that happens. Squalls hit like an ambush and vanished like they were never there. 15 minutes, maybe, from the first violent gust to the moment the wind began to drop. 15 minutes was enough to destroy my life. When the wind eased, the fog thinned just a little. Not enough to make the world clear, but enough that I could finally see farther than 20 feet. The boom was bent. The lattice that should have been straight now sagged. The crane was damaged and unstable. Any extra gust, any movement, any load shift could finish it. The radio crackled. Crane 3, are you there? Are you alive? Give us a signal." I moved toward the console and tried to answer. "I'm here. I'm alive. Send help." But the mic was dead. I could hear them. They couldn't hear me. I looked at the ladder again. It was still there. Damaged, but there. The wind was lower now, low enough that climbing down was possible. Not safe, but possible. That difference matters when you're trying not to die. I stood up slowly, feeling the cab react. The glass creaked. The structure made small sounds like it didn't like my weight shifting. I looked for safety gear. It was gone. No harness. No fall protection. Nothing except what was bolted down. It must have been thrown out or crushed when the crane shifted. My stomach turned. But there was no choice left that didn't end in waiting for the tower to fail. I stepped out onto the platform and grabbed the ladder. Wet metal. Cold under my gloves. Wind still moving around me, though weaker now. Clouds still clinging to the structure. I started climbing down. I counted rungs to keep my mind from staring into the drop. 1 rung, 2, 10, 20. My arms burned. My chest felt tight. Short gusts hit me for a few seconds at a time, uneven and ugly, and each time I pressed myself into the ladder and prayed. I made it down to around 460 feet when my heart stopped. A rung was missing. My foot reached for something that wasn't there. My other foot slipped. For a second, I hung on by my hands alone, muscles screaming, and I pulled myself back onto the last intact section. I looked down and saw the lattice below was twisted slightly. 2 rungs were missing. Go back up and wait? Or keep going? If conditions weren't perfect, nobody was coming up for me. And I didn't think the crane would stay standing long enough for perfect conditions. I pressed my forehead against the ladder and tried to breathe. Panic built in waves. I felt weak, like I could fall at any second. I slammed my forehead lightly against a rung, just to shock myself back into focus. Breathe, I whispered. Just a little farther. I decided to keep going. The gap was about 3 feet, 36 inches. That sounds small on the ground. Up there, it felt like jumping between buildings. I reached up 2 rungs, braced my back against the cage, and lowered myself carefully, feeling for the next solid rung. That's when a gust shoved me backward. My hand slipped. My body swung out into open air. The ladder tore out of my grip, and I started falling. I dropped maybe 10 or 12 feet before I caught the ladder again with one hand. Pain hit, sharp and wrong, and my arm bent in a way it shouldn't. I didn't feel full pain right away. Shock does that, but I knew instantly what it meant. I had broken my arm. Now I was trapped in a new way. I couldn't climb back up, and climbing down just got harder. But I still had one good arm. I still had my legs. And I still had the ground somewhere beneath all that space. So I made a system. 1 leg, good arm, other leg. Test each rung before committing. Move slow. Don't let panic rush me. I kept going down like that, rung by rung, shaking, sweating, vision blinking with black spots. I fought exhaustion, so hard it felt like wrestling my own body. Then I heard shouting. Human voices below, rescue teams, ambulances, people calling out. I couldn't answer them. My throat felt like sand. But hearing them gave me a new surge of energy. They're there. If I get lower, they can help. I kept going. At around 230 feet, I could clearly see the site. Ambulances with flashing lights, people running, a cluster of workers around a taped-off area. That was where the beam hit. I didn't look too long. I didn't want that image in my head while I was still fighting to survive. I kept climbing until I reached around 65 feet, where someone climbed onto exterior scaffolding and held out a harness clipped to a line. "You're safe now," he shouted. "Put this on." Relief hit so hard, I started crying. I wanted to tell him I couldn't manage it alone with one arm. I wanted to ask about Tyler, about Paul, about who got hurt, about whether anyone saw him fall. But then the adrenaline dropped all at once, like someone turned off a faucet in my veins. Exhaustion won. My grip loosened. I felt weightlessness, the beginning of another fall, and I couldn't make my body react in time. The last thing I saw was a rung, about 10 feet above the ground, and then only darkness.